Hello, chess friends. This is International Master Valeri Lilov. I am sorry for the delay. There were some technical difficulties with the YouTube, but I think that it's working right now. I do hope it's working. And so today we're going to be talking about endgames, and I really want to talk to you a bit more about how to think in endgames, and more importantly, I want to focus on three key ideas that will help you to tackle basically any endgame: how to think like a master in the endgame, why piece activity is crucial, and how to avoid having any passive pieces, and how to coordinate your pieces like a pro. Three things we're going to talk about. So what I want to do is I want to show you a few brilliant examples of, in my opinion, what happened to be the best chess endgames that I've seen. And again, I want to clarify that I'm not going to talk about best chess endgames in terms of endings. And many people think about endgames like, okay, just king, rook, and a few uh, pieces remaining. I'm talking about positions in which queens are off. When you have queens off the board, what happens is that you've got an endgame. So you could say it's a multi-piece endgame, or you can call it in different ways, but it's an endgame, and genuinely that's the idea. So I want to start with the game that was actually played between Bobby Fischer and Tigran Petrosian. So we're actually going to take a look at this game, and the way it actually started with e4, black played c5, and then white did the move of knight f3. So Bobby was actually playing with white in this game. He played a immediate d4 going to the open Sicilian, and now we have, of course, the move of bishop to the d3 that sets it all up. Knight c6, knight x to the c6, bx to the c. This was one of Fischer's favorite systems of playing it, as it was basically all about one thing. First of all, take the control, and then ultimately there is a chance with which we could play with the move of pawn up to c4, and then we could actually think about knight to the c3, and this is the way to go forward. Okay, so actually that's after the move of bishop to d3. What is happening in this game? Bishop d3. So the black, after this exchange taking, of course, there was the move of short castles in this position, and then black plays d5. So what is white supposed to do right this moment in that position? So great question. Very, very interesting. Let's see what you guys think about this position. Think about this from white's side. Mm-hmm. So the whole thing is that you'd like to be considering. This is a big idea you'd like to keep in mind. Actually, so the first thing you'd want to know, rule number one. Actually, in most positions, think or focus your idea on how to get more out of the opening. And I know that this doesn't have to do anything with endgame, and this is why I actually started with this, because I want to show you how you get into a good endgame. I don't want to show you just how you get into it, how you play an endgame, and how you get into one. The thing is, most valuable idea that you need to do is to focus on either getting more space, fighting for the center, or opening up the position. White played c4 along the way. This was very powerful. He already had this space, and he had a very good development, two pieces, as opposed to black was got zero. But if he wanted to use this in a sense, he needed to open the position and prove that. Black played knight f6, cx to the d5, cx to the d5, edx to the d, edx to the d, and then there was the move of knight to c3, which actually works out fine. So what we do in this moment is we're actually going to get ready in this type of position. We could do him, so we can have that possibility. We play bishop to the g5, and so that's how we're setting up, little by little, actually. So one of the things that you have to consider in that type of position is number one, rule number one. You start the opening not with the thought of endgame, as many people believe. You start with the idea of what structure you create. You probably heard that most of the times, actually, it's about how you could arrange or regroup your pieces and close them up. Queen f3 plus rook e1, bishop g5, and then maybe actually we could get ahead with a move of rook to the d1. We've got all those possibilities, and then white is going to be ultimately coming forward with probably a chance to attack against the d5. We create a structure. Now, if you go into an endgame within that type of structure, you're already having an edge. This is how you want to be thinking about that. It's a very, very good idea to start it. So knight c3, very good move. Now what did black do? Bishop e7. He wants to castle. And this is the moment where white decided, I have to play more actively before black is castled and developed all that well. So there's queen a4, queen d7, and then there is the move of rook to the e1, pinning down the bishop, and everything is great. Exchange, takes, and then bishop e6. So how do we play now? Okay. So I think white is doing a fine job. He's got this bishop on the d3 from d3, keeping the tension against a6. We're well set. Black, on the other hand, has fairly bad pieces, including the bishop on the e6 that's just not so good in this case, and the one on e7 in that moment. And in fact, what do we do? How to advance right now? Well, I gotta say, with the light square bishop keeping up a little tension against the a6, a couple of the others, we need to plan on that endgame. But how? How do we start with this? Do we advance in some other way? Do we attack or target? I think we could be thinking maybe in respect to bishop f4, so we can do a move like rook a c1. Or we could be thinking about a move like bishop to the g5, so we can pin him down on f6. This is an interesting idea. We could be doing any of those kind of moves. But how do we play? So, first and foremost, it is a huge idea. White's having space, it's having activity, control is really well put. But the most important, and I need you to remember that, Fischer knew it, and this is how it usually works. The most important is try to coordinate. See, in endgames, you're usually going to have general activity that seems to fit. Like right now, we have the knight on the a4, the bishop could go to f4 and g5. I mean, that's not a problem where the piece is going to go. The important is to make sure that our pieces can come together. And as they come together, that is where they can do much more. With the bishop to the e3, you could see the possibility for white to use both his bishop as well as the knight in respect of advancing towards c5. So through the c5 square, we can hit an a6, and then we could hit the square of a6. So most black's pieces are basically being bad. She doesn't have that many things in this position, and so this is pretty important. Okay, and let's see what's happening after the move of like bishop to the e3, and just let's see what is going on in that moment. After bishop to e3 was really done, and obviously black has a little bit more to worry. Keep in mind that the Fischer was playing against Tigran Petrosian, one of the greatest positional players of all time. So you played castle, and I'm going to give you a moment to think about what white should do. He's well placed. He's got a good development and better control. Things are actually wonderful. So how do we play this right now? Well, you're thinking about a couple of different moves. Of course, there's bishop d4, there's knight c5, there is the move of, rook to the d1. There is like a variety of ideas that we could be thinking about. But what I need you to remember and know is that essential, and first and foremost, actually, you would like to go ahead and advance differently. So what we're doing here is we're really moving ahead with actually the bishop to the c5. See, this move responds one of the biggest calls that you must have in a position like that. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about long term. Now, let me clarify what that means. What does long term mean in an endgame? It doesn't mean that we're thinking about, oh, is that going to be a long term position for a certain piece? No, there is hardly a long-term piece out there. So like, in fact, actually, this is very important. What we could do in this type of position is, first and foremost, keep the attack, you advance, keep the pressure. And so in case of bishop takes the c5, knight takes the c5, we have the attack out there. And so what do we do in that moment? Of course, we think about the long-term impact out there. So what we got to think about is that in case of the exchange with bishop, then there's a knight x to the c6. And so like, how do we play this right now? Well, black plays rook f8. The long-term impact is that black is going to have to worry because of the e6, and he's going to definitely have to worry because of the, there is the a6, there is the e6, and then there is the white ability to put extra pressure against black. It's a beautiful thing. And then take a look at how white is able to do this. Black defends. Now I want you to think: do we exchange? Do we play? Like playing with the move of pawn up to the b4. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what I like to tell you is get more space and pieces. Like, so we have that bishop on c5 that is actually controlling. We have the bishop from the d3 that keeps the tension against the a6. And so I want to tell you now. You know what Fischer did in this case? The thing that he wanted to do in that moment was simply to continue, gain a little more space. We played bishop takes e7, rook takes to e7, and then of course there is the move of pawn up to the b4. That is a wonderful thinking. Well, why do we do this? Because then we have that challenge, and actually you have that option to play with the move of knight of the c5. And so this is like a really interesting idea. We have that ability to think about knight c5. We've got the rook a to c1 and pawn up to the a3 little by little. Remember that in most times, again, it's about the long-term impact of the moves. And how do you find out that your moves have a long-term impact in the position? It's very easy. Okay, it's very, very easy. Ask yourself, if I do this specific move, candidate, what? And that's a big deal, actually. What would it do in the longer run? So just now we see that c5 is obviously a more of a permanent square for the knight. It is beautiful if it goes in there. In addition to that, we're going to be able to like challenge or attack out there against the a6. And so this is very, very important. And after that move, and you can have the attack against the e6, and then we can have the attack against the a6. And so this is perfect. One of the keys is to think, I need to get my pieces, need to get those forces ready long term. That was Perfect. Let's take a look and see what happened after the move b4 took place. Well, the reality is Fischer's opponent didn't think actually there was anything else except of king f8. And now we have knight c5, which adds more pressure, forcing the black bishop to go right down. This is perfect, right? So what do we do next? It's actually, I got to tell you that when you think about the pieces of white, he's got a lot. However, the problem is that there isn't an immediate way to break through. So what to do right now? Okay, so the whole thinking is that we're definitely able to, advance. Maybe we can actually exchange, and then we can play with the move of knight rook takes to the e7, and then, for instance, after rook takes to e7, there is the move of king takes to the f7, king takes e7, maybe king to the d6 out there, and so this is huge. What do we do? Okay, big thinking. The most important thing that you'd like to be doing is to concentrate your attention. And that is a very important thing on the backside pieces. So this is the thing that we need to do. So actually, what we need to do in this type of position is concentrate on getting ready. First thing, there's the move of f3 out there, and so we have f3 going on. We're actually able to get that king towards f2. We could play for g4, rook c1, and rook a to the d1 in that type of position. And so this is what we got to think about. A key point is remember to never rush it. Endgames are always about little, subtle improvement. When we do these little and subtle improvements, you can make a lot of like attacks and different type of ideas, and it helps. Just give it the time that is most necessary. So now when we have the move of pawn up to the f3, of course there is g4 that will be done too, and there's more. So let's take a look. Actually, well, after f3, apparently black had enough to be worried about, so he did rook e to a7, rook to e5, and then black plays bishop to the d7. Most of black's own pieces feel terrible. The two rooks that are defending the a7. If he ends up playing a5, there's going to be b5 to set up a passed pawn. A brilliant knight, a brilliant rook, a very actively developed bishop that is strong. So how do we really break in that type of position? Do we have a way to go about this or advance or threaten? It's a good question. This is very important. Yeah. Do now. I'd like to point out a couple things. This is a really interesting idea. The number one thing that you'd like to be doing is, now listen to me very carefully because that's going to make a difference in your game. It's pretty big. Consider transformation. Endgames are always about transformation. You transform from one position to another. That is how huge it is. The move that white picked up to do was knight takes to the d7. And so actually what we're doing here is we exchange the black bishop. He has to move away, apparently. And then when he did do knight takes to the d7, and of course the move of rook takes to the d7, then we're going forward. What am I talking about? Well, we have rook c1. Lines it up towards the c6 square, and then as soon as black plays rook d6, of course we're getting ahead with rook c7. Now, nobody would ever believe that an exchange like knight takes to the d7 could be made because it looks crazy. We have a very active knight as opposed to a really terrible bishop. And yet it was done for the simple reason that if we make sure that we exchange this now, we're going to get the activity. We're going to be able to transfer that rook into play. And then we sacrifice something to get something out there. So this is what we're up for. So exchange, takes, rook c1, rook to d6, rook to the d7. And then ultimately the idea is that now black had to do the move knight to d7, but then white just played rook e2, and it was terrific. So g6. Now what should white be doing right now? Let's think about that. So it's a great position to talk about. Very, very good development. Almost all is into play. Almost everything's into play, including the powerful rook and the good forces around. But how do we do this? Yes. We have to do that one thing, that one idea, in order to make things, perfect. And what is it? Actually, it is much more about the king in that type of position. So let's think about that. King. Everything else is perfect. Ask yourself, what is it that I don't have? Remember, in Endgames, you do have the time. So actually, that is what we have to be doing. We get ready and we advance. So just we have that possibility to bring the king forward in that moment. So it's just rook to the d. King f2 was much more powerful. h5, f4, that was what white did. h4, and then there's king to the f3. f5, and then there is a king to the e3. d4 check, which black did in a sense, and that was actually good. But then what white picked to do was the move of king d2. Why did he do all this waiting? Because if you think about it, white did a lot of moves that seemed like just pure waiting. It wasn't about anything special or tactical. It was just like moving around. So why did he do it? The only reason was because the more black advanced with the h pawns, with the other pawn and whatever, the more vulnerabilities he created in his own position. And that is what is huge about this. Let the opponent make the vulnerable moves, because when he does do them, you just take advantage. And like he's overextended the position right now with both the h and the d pawns. He's given up some diagonals, like the bishop to the c4 diagonal that we could use. And then apparently there is a lot more to do in that moment. So step by step, it's very, very useful. Well, if the king to the d2, now black played knight to the b6. And then, of course, there is a rook e to e7. That's a wonderful thinking, actually. We're getting the chance to move both rooks out there against our opponent. We have rook f7 to bring over. The key, oftentimes, and you gotta remember that the key is, in reality, related to the plan, to the build-up. And when you get that plan, when you get that build-up, you go from there. So now what black played was knight d5, check, king e8, and rook b7. You see, remember that it was all black. He did all those type of weaknesses. He did all these vulnerabilities, allowing white's rooks to come down. All that Fischer did was to wait. He got a good position. He got the advantage. And then he said, you know what? I'm just going to let you do the bad moves. So this is very, very important, actually. The key, this is big. The key is making sure that no matter what you do, is you coordinate, you regroup, and you set out the pieces to to get better. Now, with that in mind, of course, black played with knight takes f4, and then surely white played with a move bishop to the c4. Of course, we have the two rooks out there. We've got moves like rook h7 or rook h8. We've got the light squared bishop, and then we have the ability to kick out and attack the black king. It was it. one of the greatest. It was called the Iron Tigran. The Iron Tigran, like Petrosian, really lost it. And I want to talk to you about why did you lose it. We're going to go back to the beginning of this game and discuss the key elements. Really huge. The first big element that really counts. Now, I do not want you to forget that. The first big element that really counts is the idea of what is an opening advantage and how we can try to get one. Apparently, the important thing was about C4. Everything afterwards was rather easy to manage. I have to keep that now, right? So this is the thing that you would like to do. So in fact, like first and foremost is that you can continue with the move of this is a really good idea. Edicts to the D, edicts to the D, knight C3, queen A4, rook E1, and just we have that pressure. So you set foot in an already favorable endgame. Big idea, actually. That's nice. And then after that move, things are actually going much better, step by step. So another interesting thing that I would want to tell you about is when you get to build up a position as good as this, bishop c5, remember to think of coordinating the pieces. Coordination provides them with more internal value. I think it was Kasparov who once said that when you have a piece, don't think about generally its value, like knight is 3 points, bishop is 3 points, rook is 5. That's very limiting. You want to think in terms of what they do. And what they do will often determine what you can expect. Different possibilities, resources, and so on and so forth. That is the key idea. Many of the times and many of the occasions, you would have to, when you coordinate the piece, instead of having 50% or 60% of their power, you bring immediately 80%, sometimes 100%, which means full capacity or potential, something that White did with knight b5. And also remember to think about the long-term impact. If you're looking for a move, ask yourself, if I do go that way with this move, what will be the long-term impact of that particular move right now? And the long-term impact is going to show you if you actually wish to go that way or that route, or you don't. So knight c5, and there was f3. The rook came out on the e5 as it went. And then effectively, if the bishop d7, knight takes to the d, and then rook c1, not only White's pieces, just got better, but he was able to do what we call as transformation. Instead of just having a nice position with good pressure, which is usually something you want to keep, especially if you don't see your opponent moving out or getting away, you want to keep that. But instead of necessarily keeping it, White was considering the way to transform. And how did he transform? What did he gain? He gained another open line and another possibility to make Black's position miserable. See, it wasn't just like, oh, well, let's just do the exchange because I feel like it. That's not good. We did the exchange because there was more, to do, more to deliver with that. The rook was coming in. The black pieces were actually fairly back and behind. And that helped White. So the rook came on the d6, and White just came through. Remember now, in this, we talk about speed. Slow is fast. Fast is slow. How about that? Endgame is about the opposite. Endgames are never about speed in the sense that we know it in the middle game or opening. Because opening and middle game are about who takes the initiative, who starts stuff first. Endgame is about a gradual buildup. Imagine a running, competition. I mean, we got sprint and we got a marathon. If you're basically competing in a sprint, you do it in one way. If you do a marathon, you got to do it in a different way. Endgames are marathons. So you take that, into consideration, and you consider every single move to be a part of that marathon. No move must force things. more than they should be. Fischer did it brilliantly. He activated, he thought of it in the right way, he coordinated his beats, and he let the opponent make the mistakes himself so that he can take advantage of them eventually. Now, there was nothing better than that. Nothing better. And if you really look at this in that way, you find out why it was so good. Effective, powerful, dangerous. Black was awful. And of course, in case of knight of the d5, rook f7, there was a bishop to the c4 with the idea of rook h7. It was great. I think the biggest idea of this game, the biggest thing you can remember, is how necessary it turns out to be that our pieces can move on and improve. So in a sense, White was absolutely perfect. He was brilliant. Took a long time, but eventually it did do what we needed it to do, and it worked. So what is the other endgame I want to show you? I want to show you a short endgame from an endgame from a classical game, actually. Let me bring it up so you could see, in fact, Anatoly Karpov. Karpov was the master of endgames. So he was able to defeat a much stronger opponent, Garry Kasparov, in a brilliant endgame. But again, we're going to start from the beginning and go and work our way through there so you could see how necessary the structure is or has to do with the way and how this is going. So black played knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop e7, bishop to the g5, of course h6, bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, e3, castle short, and then after the queen to the c2, black played with c5 to push through and open up. Okay, so this is good now. Let's talk about it. D takes to the c5, D takes to the c4, bishop takes to c4. Black opened, and it wasn't right for him to open up all that early, so he did it anyway. White castled short. Then, of course, surely there was the exchange on c3. Queen takes to the c3, queen takes to the c, and b takes to the c. I mean, forcing the events while he was still behind was definitely a bad idea for black. But it was interesting. It was interesting to see how that works. So, what do we do next? How to think about that position? Well, let's talk about one of the biggest things that you would ever encounter in the opening, in the end game. Beginning with the question. It's a huge question. What are the prospects? Now, this is going to take you quite a while to deliver and figure out. It takes a long time to think about this, but how do we do it? Thinking in terms of that basically suggests that you do two things. First, you need to really picture where you want to be, to get your forces. For example, we could say that white's rook is going to go to the d1, the other rook is going to go towards the b1, and then maybe the knight is going to go towards d4 as well as b5 and everything. And that's great. Well, let's do the same sort of assessment or idea for black. You have a problem, right? Because he doesn't have any of those. That's what I mean by evaluating the prospects. Most chess players do not evaluate prospects of the pieces. They think just in terms of simplicity. Okay, I do have that, and he does have that. It's just great. But think. Most important idea is to concentrate our attention on what are the prospects and possibilities for the pieces, and then for sure we can get that these two rooks in the d1 and b1, that knight from the d4 to b5. We could be exercising much more pressure over b7, and then we could be thinking about the c6. That's it. Take the time that is necessary. It's going to help, I guarantee you. So well, that's it, really. I mean, after the move of b takes to the c3 was done, black did the move of knight at the d7. Then, of course, there was c6, b takes to the c6, rook a to the b1, knight b6, and bishop e2. So what we're having is a very decent position. Black played c5, and then of course white played rook fc1. That's an idea. We're really getting the pieces along, and we have that opportunity to move forward and step up. Now, you're probably going to say, but okay, Valeri, what you initially thought about this position isn't happening here. It's different. And now I suggest you to follow the North Star. You're going to get that confusion every single time. Don't worry. Okay, don't worry about the fact you don't know what's going on with deposition and how it's changing. Nobody knows what's going to happen in an endgame. No, even the great players don't know. There are hundreds of possibilities. It looks like it's simple, but it's actually not. Much more difficult than you can expect. But what you have to do is, this is a huge idea, a really big deal. Think, and I'm going to say it again, think about piece activity. Evaluating the position from the perspective of piece activity and control is what is going to matter most. We realize now that there is going to be the move of, there is 17th, a rook after the c1. And suddenly this just gets ugly and horrible for black, as there are no valuable possibilities or prospects for any of the black pieces. So what white is doing is king f1, bishop to the d5, rook b5, knight d7, rook a5, rook f2, b8, c4. The black bishop came right back at the c6, knight e1. And so what we realize is that black is going to have the move rook to b4, but then we do the move of bishop to d1, rook b7, and then there is f3 that we're going for. Rook d8, knight d3. Have a nice challenge, and then we have the ability to really make everything work extremely well, extremely fast. Bishop b3, king f8, knight x3. You may say that black probably made some blunders to fall into that. Did he? Maybe he did, probably. But they were not too bad. We're not huge in such a position. What is so important, what is so relevant, is that you always get to think in respect to what will be the different prospects of each piece, so that they can go forward and they can do different things. With the move of 27, knight takes to the c5, that was the end of it. Knight takes to the c, rook takes to the c. So let's go back and really talk about, where did black falter? At least what was the strategy? It wasn't the end game. It was before the end game. You see, many people think I'm suffering in endgames. Chances are you're not suffering in endgames. Chances are you're suffering before the endgame. Because usually if you go into an equal endgame, you're not likely going to lose it. But if you go into what I call a worse endgame, or a worse structure with a bad formation, well, then you're screwed. The idea behind it is, think of the prospects of the endgame, and more importantly, the prospects of the pieces, where they can go, what they can do. Imagine things, like draw them as a map in your mind. That's going to help you. This is the only guideline you can follow. That's why computers are terrible at endgames, because there's no way to calculate endgames. It's just our ability to think schematically and picture different ideas. Likewise, we're going to b5, the knight going to e5, and the long-term pressure. You don't calculate that. You see it and schematically figure out how that is going to work. So thank you all for joining me today. I hope that I was helpful with some of my suggestions. Please don't forget to subscribe for the brilliant 50% discount on my Endgame tutorial that I've actually recorded recently. So it's right beneath the video. I do hope that you have a great time checking it out and studying some more of my insight on Endgames. And I'll speak to you in a couple weeks. Thanks so much.